Welcome everyone to Bank Card Training 101. My name is Mitch Langer, Vice President of Operations and Sales for the Nuvo Company, and I will be your presenter today. Today we will be covering 4 areas for training. The first will be a general introduction to payment processing, which will cover the payment highway and the payment transaction players, the difference between physical and virtual card processing, the various card types and card brand associations, and the different price structures processors charge to merchants, including the difference between interchange, which is charged by Visa, MasterCard, Discover, and American Express, and the various processor fees. Card processing is simply a way for a business to accept credit and debit cards. As a business, you would fall into one of 2 categories. Retail, which means that the majority of the transactions being processed are card present and the card is physically swiped. The second category is Moto, which is card not present. This applies to any business that processes transactions through mail order, over the phone, or online. For either of these, a physical or virtual terminal is required to process payments, which could include a terminal with a built-in printer, a point-of-sale software, an online shopping cart connected to a virtual terminal, or a payment gateway. The business must also have an active account with the merchant services provider. Nuvo is a sub-ISO or independent sales organization of such providers. Now, let's go over the steps in the transaction cycle. Step 1. A customer makes a purchase using either a debit or credit card. Step 2. The merchant transmits the data to their processor, who then in turn sends the request to the issuing bank. The issuing bank will either approve or decline the transaction and send that information back to the processor. Assuming the transaction is approved, the interchange rate, which is again charged by Visa, MasterCard, Discover, or American Express, is assessed to the approved transaction. The processor then processes the payment and funds the merchant. The merchant will then have the funds deposited into their bank account, usually within 1 to 2 business days. Finally, at the end of the billing cycle, a merchant statement is generated and sent to the merchant. All fees are automatically debited from the merchant's bank account, typically between the 1st and the 3rd of the following month. Here are the key players in the payment cycle. First are the networks, which are also referred to as the card networks or card brand associations. These include Visa, MasterCard, Discover, and American Express. Next are the member processing banks. These can be an issuer or an acquirer whom have the authority to issue credit cards to consumers, as well as sign businesses for card processing. Next are the actual processors, who provide the platform to move payment information. Next, you have your independent sales organizations and merchant services providers. These are backed by member banks and authorized to set up merchant accounts. Finally, you have your sub-ISOs or independent representatives. These organizations board merchants through a merchant services provider, but do not have a direct relationship with the sponsor bank. The next section we're going to move into is the difference between physical and virtual card processing. First, physical terminal processing. This requires hardware or equipment at a merchant's location to enter in card data. These transactions are mainly swiped, but the hardware equipment allows for keying in the card information if needed. This hardware equipment could include a point-of-sale software or a device such as what you would see in a retail store or restaurant. Could also be a terminal with a built-in printer, which you commonly see in convenience stores, or mobile processing, which turns your smartphone into a payment terminal. Next is virtual terminal processing, which is a terminal interface that is accessed by a URL. The payments are processed by way of the internet. This can also be a payment gateway. These can also be connected to online shopping carts. They typically allow for card information to be keyed in, but can also allow for physical cards to be swiped. Now we are going to quickly review the various card types that are out there and the different card brands. First, you have your credit cards, which allow cardholders to make a purchase today, but make a portion of that payment back to the issuing bank at a later date. As a business, you would pay a percentage fee for each transaction. Next, you have your charge cards, which are becoming less and less common, mainly because they require the cardholder to pay off the balance in full at the end of each month. Next, you have your check and debit cards, which are tied into a cardholder's checking account. At the time of the purchase, the purchase amount is immediately withdrawn from the cardholder's account. A PIN number is required to complete a transaction. The business pays a per-item fee as well as a debit network access fee. Purchases may still be processed as a credit, and an interchange rate is applied rather than the debit network access fee. Then there are contactless cards, which are smart cards with a microchip that uses a radio wave to communicate with the card reader. The card simply requires close proximity to the card reader itself. But more and more, these types of cards are being replaced with Apple and Samsung Pay. There are also EBT cards, which stands for Electronic Benefits Transfer Cards. Such examples of these cards are food stamp cards, military payment, and Social Security payment cards. For these, only a per-item fee is charged to the merchant. Finally, you have the 4 major card brands, which are made up from Visa, MasterCard, American Express, and Discover. Visa is the largest credit card issuer with 48% of the market share. MasterCard comes in next at 26%, American Express at 15%, and Discover makes up just 3% of all credit cards that are issued. This next section, we will look at merchant pricing and the components of merchant fees, including interchange, which is set by the card brand associations, and the various fees that are charged or could be charged by a processor to provide service. Interchange is a term that has come up a lot during this presentation, but what exactly is it? In simple terms, interchange is the rate that is applied to a transaction, and it typically contains 2 parts, a percentage and a per-item fee. The interchange rate itself is based on 2 variables. First, what is the card type? Meaning, is it a debit card, a rewards card, or a business card? And how was that card processed? Was the card physically swiped, or was the card information keyed in? These 2 factors result in hundreds of different interchange rates, which are set by Visa, MasterCard, Discover, and American Express. The main thing to understand about interchange is that it is the cost of business. Doesn't matter how big or how small of a business you are, how much you process on a monthly basis, everybody pays the same interchange rate for a debit card, for a rewards card, or for a business card. Here are a few examples of interchange. For card-present transactions, you have your regulated debit cards. These debit cards are issued by your major banks, such as Chase or Bank of America. If you have a rewards card, which are the most popular credit cards on the market right now, when you process that card, the merchant is going to pay 1.65%. And you've got card present standard retail, which is a standard credit card, non-rewards. When a merchant swipes that card, they will pay 1.51%. But let's take a look at the difference as to what happens when the card is not present. For your CPS retail, but this time the card is not present, instead of paying 1.51%, you are paying 1.8%. For your rewards cards, when the card is swiped, again, you're paying 1.65%. Same exact card. The card is being keyed in this time. The interchange rate jumps up to 1.95%. For regulated debit, the interchange rate remains the same at 5 basis points at 22 cents. Regulated debit cards are the only cards on the market that are not affected in terms of their interchange rate, whether the card is present or card not present. Now we'll take a look at the processor fees. Since the card brand associations do not pay processors, the processors must charge something to provide service. And there are multiple rates and fees a processor can charge to provide service, which can include the following. A rate, which is commonly referred to as a discount rate. This is a percentage that is applied to the total monthly volume of the amount that was processed. A transaction fee, which is simply a fee that is charged each time a transaction is attempted, or it could also be an authorization fee, which is applied each time a transaction is approved. In most cases, though, either a transaction or authorization fee is charged to the merchant, but in some cases, both may be applied. This is always determined by the processor and what that merchant agrees to pay for their service. There may be some other additional fees as well, which can include a monthly statement fee, a monthly support or customer service fee, a monthly gateway fee, an annual fee, among others. Now, most processors charge what's called PCI fees, and those fees can include a PCI annual fee and a PCI non-compliance fee. You may be wondering, what is PCI compliance? First, PCI stands for Payment Card Industry Compliance, and it is an annual test that all merchants must go through and pass to help ensure that they are doing everything they can to protect cardholder data. It consists of a questionnaire that needs to be completed and a network, hardware, or software scan to ensure there are no weaknesses where credit card data can be stolen. This is required in most cases, but not all, depending on how you are set up. Most importantly, it's federally mandated for all merchants to complete, and failure to complete or to secure your system could result in a PCI non-compliance fee being charged, which can range from $25 to $50 or more on a monthly basis. The annual PCI fee ranges from $75 to $150 depending on the processor. Thank you for joining Bank Card Training 101. Should you have any questions regarding this presentation, please feel free to give me a call or send me an email.